All right, great. Well, thank you guys for attending today. So, as we begin, we do want to go through a few chapter updates as always. So, I think many of you that are on this call have been on an EDPA Northwest call in the past, but for those of you who are new, the EDPA Northwest chapter, we are a nonprofit organization whose mission is to advance the interests of members engaged in the design, production, and service of exhibits, events, and experiential environments. Sorry, I'm gonna let a couple more people in here. And so if you don't know me, I'm Emma Kristen, and I want to give a shout out to the rest of our amazing board members. So we have Taylor Freckleton with Fusion Imaging, Anna Rembold with MedEvent, Mel White with Classic Exhibits, Nicole Klein with Exhibit Expressions, and Jenny Cohn with Condit. And we also want to thank our supportive sponsors. Our platinum sponsors this year are AluVision, B Matrix, and CSI. And our gold sponsor is Taylor Visual Impressions. And our silver sponsor is Genesis Exhibits. So if it weren't for their kind financial contributions, we would not be able to provide these beneficial events. And I also just want to highlight that our 2025 sponsorships are now open as well. So we do have our Eventbrite link here, but otherwise, if you guys just want to email me directly, I can give you more information on that. And then as always, we also have a save the date. So currently just for December, if you're attending EDPA Access, we will see you there and participate in the chapter challenge. And then our 2025 events are coming soon. And as the board this year, we had dedicated to do an educational webinar every other month. And so in 2025, if you are interested in continuing these, please let us know. And also if you have a specific topic you would like us to discuss, these are just a few areas of growth in our industry that we could highlight on. So please let us know as we begin our planning processes. And so with that being said, please welcome Charles Pappas. Charles has covered the exhibition industry for Exhibitor magazine since 2002. His articles have won numerous national and regional awards, including ASBPE, and Charles, correct me if I'm wrong on these, Maggie and the Tabby Awards. Right. His books include Flying Cars, Zombie Dogs, and Robot Overlords, a probe of how the world expos and trade fairs shaped history. He also served as a consultant to Expo 2020 Dubai and the effort to bring Expo 2027 to the United States. His books, Flying Cars, Zombie Dogs, and Robot Overlords, and Expo 2020 Dubai, the definitive edition, probe how world exhibitions have shaped history and transformed everyday lives. His next book, Nobody Sits Like the French, a radically new way of seeing Paris through the impact of the World Expos in the City of Light, will be published in 2025 by Luster Publishing. And for 38 years now, Exhibitor Magazine has published its salary survey, the annual X-ray of the state compensation in our industry, breaking it down from budget to business sector, number of employees to number of years on the job, and much more. The in-depth analysis has become an indispensable arrow in the quiver of exhibit marketers who need to know if what they're putting into their job is worth what they're getting back. So with that, please welcome Charles Pappas.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming today. It's really nice to be here. And just a quick background, we've been doing this, as Emma said, since, well, actually 1987, when Reagan was president, is when we first started it. This is the 38th iteration of it. And today I'm going to go over kind of the general accumulated findings. But to give you some background, we basically take data on salaries and benefits for corporate event managers, exhibit and trade show coordinators, exhibit and marketing directors, and basically, kind of low to high on that, and we see what the average compensation is for them. Now, one of the data points I'd want you to keep in mind today is that more than 30% of face-to-face marketing professionals, that is overall, have been in their possession for less than 3 years. That's really kind of, I think, a post-COVID phenomenon, and it's going to affect a lot of what the results are in the salary survey, but also what they have to look forward to. So, with no further ado, let's go to slide 3, if we can, Emma, on the in-survey insights. One of the things that we find is that we basically see that salaries are generally increasing. Well, that's not too surprising. And that reflects the industry's general rebound post-pandemic. But it comes down to this. The average salary across the board for all of those categories is about $98,580, which is not bad. But so let's continue the good news for a moment. So if you would, please go to slide 4. The average salary is up 2.7% from 2023. That's not bad. And in a pretty encouraging turn of events, there's about 77% of our survey respondents reported receiving a raise in the last year. Again, that's not bad. And that compares to 74% who said the same thing in 2023. So it's a slight uptick, but a positive one nonetheless. And additionally, about 64% anticipate a raise within the next 12 months. That's not bad. 62% by comparison received a performance-based bonus over the last year. Again, not too bad. And for them, the average bonus comes in at about 18,700. And that usually is based on something like bonuses, 401ks, stock purchases, and other forms of additional compensation. The one thing we do notice, though, overall, is that base salaries in the last 38 iterations of this survey maintained a pretty slow but steady march upward. Aside from a few setbacks, 2008 with the crash, COVID, those are to be expected once in a while. But on the whole, we really do see that there's been a fairly steady uptick, as I said, in your salary. Basically, in 38 years, the only downturns, if I recall correctly, were about 1988, 1992, 1996, post 2008, 2016, and around COVID as well. So not too awfully bad, considering it's over a period of nearly 4 decades. So if you please go to slide 5, where we'll talk about extra compensation. About 98% of exhibit and event professionals receive at least one form of additional compensation. And this year, it was a nice jump from about 15,700 in 2023 to about 18,700 this year. That's roughly a 20% jump. That's not bad at all. So the one thing, though, is compared to salaries, compensation is more erratic. And again, that's probably tied to how well a company did, or at least how much they want to reward their employees. So I believe the lowest we ever had for yearly compensation on average was around 1991, about 30 years ago, when it was around $2,900. And the high before this was about 16,000 in 2000, oddly enough. So in other words, you have to go back almost a quarter century before it reached current levels, but that was apparently a pretty good period. So about the only thing I can say about its predictability is its unpredictability. And again, as I mentioned a little while ago, the bonuses will kind of take form from overtime pay, which is not that common, to travel benefits, profit sharing, stock purchases, performance bonuses, 401ks, things like that. And oddly, one of the things I've noticed is basically overtime pay is perhaps the least likely bonus someone in the industry would be getting. Only around 9% of people do get that. So we got to go to the bad news now. So if you'd move, Emma, to the next slide. The bad news is that 45% of respondents feel their compensation is too low. And that's not too surprising when you consider the amount of work that you guys typically do in a given day and over a given year, and how many shows you're often responsible for. Now, I mentioned that salaries increased about 2.7% over 2023. That's not bad. That's nothing that, you would necessarily sneer at. But I would remind people that the average inflation rate was 4.1% in 2023, and it was a whopping 8% in 2022. So some of those gains are dwarfed by the inflation rate over the last couple of years, especially. So if you would please move to bad news part 2 in slide 7. The work-life balance is way out of whack. We see in our reporting back among respondents that they feel a quarter of them are reporting working more than 50 hours per week, and 4% report working 60 hours or more. And a few of them, quite a few of them, or rather, very few of them, are receiving compensation for that additional work. Now, about 64% again said they expect to receive a raise in the next 12 months. But more bad news, 26% said they expect their salary to remain exactly the same, and about 2% report that there's going to be a salary decrease. That's not a lot, but for them, that's a pretty big deal. So I would say that there's some concerning trends here among work-life balance. And even though we hear a lot about it, and our companies oftentimes try to make us aware of it. The HR department will tell us to watch out for that. But really, what does it come down to? Can you really work that less? Well, when you have a show going on, you really can't. When you're preparing for a show, you really can't. So a lot of it is well-intentioned, but a lot of it is basically voluntary on your part. You really can't necessarily do a lot about it. And the consequence with the increased workload is increased stress and burnout. So I want to go back to the future for a little bit. If you would, please go to slide 8. And I took a look at data from 10 years ago. Like what was the salary survey then? And it was kind of interesting to me. So a decade, 10 years ago, the average salary was about 68,700. The average salary for women was about 65,100. For men, 78,500. That's a pretty big whopping difference. The average additional compensation overall for both sexes, for both genders, was about 10,400. So the average total compensation with those bonuses and compensation came to about 79,200. Again, this is 10 years ago. So next slide, please. Let's go to now. This is now. How does that compare to now? So the average salary in the latest survey, 2024, was 98,580. That's up 43% since 2014. That's not bad. The average salary for women, and this is really encouraging, was up to about 98,700. That's up 51% since 2014. Again, that's encouraging. And oddly, the average salary for men this year was 97,300. That's below women. That's a really significant difference, a really significant advancement for what it's been for actually decades. Now, I mentioned a little while ago the average additional compensation this year was about 18,700. Not bad. So the average total, again, overall, was about $117,300. That's up 48% overall since 2014. But how does that stack up to inflation? Well, the data shows that inflation since 2014 has been about 33.4%, give or take, which means that you're actually staying a pretty healthy distance ahead of inflation. 48% jump in compensation compared to about 33% inflation in the last decade. So not too awfully bad. So let's break it down a little bit as to what we see where some of the interesting data points are. So if you would please move to point our slide 10. And it shows that the more your company's sales, the higher the salary. Well, that's kind of a duh, yeah, but not often by very much. And that's what I found interesting. So this year's data shows that if your company basically has less than $1 million in sales, the average overall salary and compensation was $96,000. Yeah, so $96,000. 1 million to 25 million in sales, the average overall salary was 93,000, so about 3,000 less, which I found really interesting. You go 25 million to almost 50 million in sales, it goes down a little bit more to about 91,000 per year. 50 million to 100 million in sales, you're getting 96,000. Not much different than those who are in companies with less than $1 million in sales. You make a decent jump forward with 100 million or more in sales by going up to about $103,000, about $103,500 in salary. Again, there's a somewhat steady progression there, but kind of an alarming discrepancy with relatively small sales to relatively huge sales, where the salaries not only stay about the same, they sometimes regress a bit. And I found that just kind of interesting and frankly, a little unfair. Now, the next one is basically in your budget, your trade show budget for slide 11. If your trade show budget is basically under $50,000, your salary averages out to about $85,700. Not bad. When the budget goes up to $50,000 to $100,000 annually, it drops to about $78,600. That's, again, fairly significant. $100,000 to about $250,000 budget for trade shows, you're doing about $90,000, about close to $91,000 in salary. So not a whole lot of difference between a budget that's under $50,000. Now, if you go to the real top tier in this, let's say a trade show budget from 2 million to about 5 million a year, the average salary comes out to about $106,000, a little over $106,000. So what that means is, in other words, if your budget is at the top, it's about 100 times higher than at the lowest. So about 50,000 as opposed to about 5 million. Yet your salary is less than 2 times more. That is, salary goes up less than 2 times, but budget might go up 100 times between the absolute bottom budget and the top budgets we see. And again, that's kind of interesting. So there's a slow progression, but it's not keeping in step with the actual budget. So in some ways, I think, face-to-face marketers are kind of getting the short end of the stick here a bit. Now, let's go to slide 12 on business. We found the most profitable sector for you is generally retail and wholesale. That's not unusual. And the average salary there was about $108,800. So again, not bad. The least profitable sector, and not too surprising, is education, with an average salary is running about a little over $76,000. So quite a bit of difference there. Oddly, associations ranked ahead of government and military sectors with an average salary of about $105,000, just a little bit north of $105,000. And again, I find that kind of interesting for retail and wholesale. Yeah, that figures. I was kind of surprised to find that associations, though, could rank ahead of government and military, which sometimes can be fairly lucrative. Now, I mentioned a little bit ago, let's go to slide 13 if possible. Let's go to the benefit of experience. Now, I mentioned that so many people today, post-COVID, are coming into the industry and have 3 years or fewer experience. Those with 1 to 5 years experience earn an average salary of about $72,900. Jump way ahead now for a moment. Those with 26 to 30 years experience earn an average of about $115,500. That's about 60% more than those, in the beginning sector, so to speak. But that after that, it's all downhill. More than 30 years experience, the average salary sinks 15% to about $99,000. That's a big jump, and to me, kind of unfair. Now, there could be many factors playing in there. I get that. But it still seems a fairly precipitous downhill run when, you have more experience than anybody else. And of course, you're probably gearing towards thinking of retirement in the not too distant future. Now, please move to slide 14. Where in the world? There's some geographical discrepancies that are interesting, but they also indicate a kind of significant change in the face-to-face marketing industry. So basically, exhibit and event professionals in the Pacific region earn salaries that are roughly 11% above the general national average. The lowest average salary actually is in what's called the East North Central area. That's Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, and Wisconsin. And those run significantly lower than the other respondents based in even the West, North Central, and Pacific. But much of what accounts for this is the cost of living. California is going to be more expensive than Wisconsin, let's say. But I went back also to 2014 and I looked at the data for that. So again, 10 years ago, the richest section of the country then was not the Pacific, but the Middle Atlantic region, which would constitute New Jersey, Maryland, Virginia, Delaware, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania, and the District of Columbia. They had an average salary then of about $78,700. Back then, though, the Pacific region was only the fourth highest for salaries. So a lot has really shifted in the interim. Now, let's go to slide 15 and what I call the prime numbers. Now, if I said the more annual trade shows you're responsible for, the more money you earn, that would seem on the face of it, pretty obvious. So what our data for this year showed that those who handle less than 5 shows a year run about $96,000 in salary. 5 to 10 shows, there's a slight uptick, about $97,700 in salary. Again, a slight uptick, that makes sense. 11 to 20 shows, a little further increment upwards to about $98,500. But now this is kind of interesting. When you handle 21 to 50 shows a year, it starts going downhill to about $97,300. 51 to 100 shows a year, and that's a lot. That's only $99,500 average salary. And again, that compares to about $96,300 for those handling less than 5 shows a year. More than 100 shows a year, which was our top category, they average about $107,600 a year. So, okay, the greatest category reflects the greatest salary, but the difference between the lowest one, less than 5 shows, and the highest one, more than 100 shows, the difference in salary is only about 11%. So in other words, low to high in terms of number of shows can be about 20 times as much or more, but the average salary is only going to be 11% more. So that really, really does tell you, that this is a tough industry and not always fairly rewarded either. So again, here too, I went back to 2014 and I thought, I was curious, is this going to be more or less? Will it have gotten better or worse? And fortunately, it has gotten a little better. Back then, the discrepancy between the lowest number of shows, less than 5, greatest number of shows, more than 100, was about 7%. not 11%. So there's been some progress in a decade, though frankly, I feel it's got a ways to go for most people in this. Now, if you would please move to slide 16. I mentioned early on that there's a real problem with the amount of overwork people do. So we also kind of parse that data coming in. And there is a direct correlation between how many hours you basically overwork and how much you make. So those who report working less than 40 hours a week, they come in with an average salary of just a little over $89,400 a year. Those who work 40 to 49 hours, about 92,800. Okay, moving upwards, 50 to 59 hours, about $118,600. So far, so good, not bad. 60 or more hours, about $120,400 is the average. So not bad, but the low to high ratio, the difference is those who work the fewest hours and those who work the most. The difference in salary is about 35%. That's probably fair in a sense of measuring it, but nonetheless, it still may not reflect a lot of equity or fairness in how people are compensated. So I went back again to 2014 and I was curious, has this gotten better or has this gotten worse? And the difference between those who work the least and those who report working the most a decade ago was 24%, as opposed to 35% now. So it's gotten better. And who knows, hopefully in the next decade, it'll get even better. In the next slide, slide 17, we also parse data on what you get per education. Is there a correlation there? And we found in the industry some interesting stats. I found that high school graduates make an average of about $69,600. Not bad. Those with some college, but no degrees, let's say a couple years or maybe 3 years, they jump up significantly to about $95,300. If you have a 2-year college degree, you regress a bit to about $87,000. A 4-year college degree is about $99,500. Now remember, 4-year college degree, $99,500, to those with some college, about $95,300, like $200 difference. Those who've done some postgraduate coursework report average salaries of $93,700. So again, 4-year college degree, $99,500. But if you've done postgraduate coursework, you go down, you fall down a bit to about $93,700. So about 600, or rather about $6,000 less. If you have an advanced degree, a master's or a PhD, you're averaging about $106,000 with that. Not bad. And that's about $37,000 over the average person with just a high school education. But still, there are some discrepancies there where they don't climb quite as fast as you think they might, especially between those with some college and those with some postgraduate coursework. Let's look at certification next in the next slide, number 18. We found that respondents with at least one industry-specific certification, like, well, Exhibitor Group has the Certified Trade Show Manager designation. They report having salaries about 9% higher than those with no industry certifications at all. And roughly that comes to a bump for you in your overall compensation to about $8,700 a year. So that's pretty decent. It's a pretty decent increase in earnings. And for those people who only have, again, 3 years or less in this industry, I would suggest taking a look at some form of certification now, because I think that will probably pay off for you in the long run. And if you do stay in the industry, possibly accumulating one or more certifications may help as you begin that upward climb in the industry, so that when you come out to, that 26 or 30 years in the industry, you don't decline if indeed you decide to stay in the industry. But I think those things might be helpful to people just starting out over the course of their career here. So that's kind of a high level look. If you go to the uh, July issue of Exhibitor Magazine, you can see it there, or you can just go online and catch our data there as well, where we kind of break it down in much greater degree. But these are kind of the highlights of it, if you will, that shows, and some of the lowlights, unfortunately, that show really where we're at. And it gives you, I think, an idea of where we're heading in the industry as well. So right now we have some time left, and if you want, I'll take your questions and handle them as best as I can.
Thank you, Charles. Yeah, does anybody have any questions? Come up off the top of your head.
Off the top of your head.
Question?
Oh yeah, okay, go ahead, Jenny.
Charles, thanks for the info. I was wondering about sort of career longevity. It was interesting to see some of the stats you shared about, people with 26 to 30 years of experience and how much they get paid or whatnot. And I just wondered, in today's environment, if we should assume that any one trade show marketing professional will stick around their job for that many years. When you were measuring that, was that regardless of the company they service, it was just as long as they were still in the trade show umbrella, we counted all of their years of service?
Yeah, we're counting everyone under the same umbrella.
Okay.
And I think, well, you're right. Part of this, I think part of the problem here, and I've noticed this over the 20 years I've been in the industry, part of the problem is that trade shows are something people stumble into.
Right.
Or they're kind of, or someone says to someone in marketing, can you do the trade show? The person left, can you take over? So there's a kind of circuitous route in. So after 5 years in traditional marketing, they're given this. And accordingly, I've noticed that even though trade shows have an enormous impact on their marketing effect, on the company, it's still considered second-class citizens in many ways. So people who stay in it for a long time, that 26 plus 30 years, maybe because they're old timers and they got in when trade shows were considered even lower on the marketing hierarchy,
Right.
maybe they're paying the price for that. And that's my gut feeling about it, that they're kind of considered, well, that was never that big a deal, or it's just something we had them do on the back end and it's not really that important. It doesn't, it's Rodney Dangerfield of marketing. It doesn't get any respect.
Yeah.
And while it's better today, it's still not where it should be. So I think for those starting out, if you're lucky, you started out in the trade show and face-to-face marketing itself, and you can build on that, especially with certification. I think we'll see with younger people starting out that there's more respect for it. And here's another reason why. There's some research that just came out, neurological research, and stick with me for a moment. They found that the impact emotionally on people who did something face-to-face was literally 10 times greater than when they did it via Zoom or virtually.
Sure.
COVID drove that home as well, that the impact of face-to-face marketing is so much greater than what you can get virtually, that it literally affects us neurologically. I mean, here's the proof of something we've always known anecdotally. Now we have proof of it. I like to think that as the industry moves forward, post-COVID, that we're going to see more respect paid in this regard. So I like to think that the correlation between experience and salaries will climb even more. And you won't have that weird drop off at points, which again, it's hard to fathom, but my gut feeling is because those people came in at times when, again, it was considered a stepchild.
Yeah.
a stepchild of marketing, and it doesn't get respect.
I ask one follow-up question.
Sure.
Did you ask for people's titles when they participated in the survey? I just wondered
Yes.
what the range of titles was, if it was all the way from a VP of marketing or a CMO down to a trade show coordinator, or if it was really more generic, it's just a marketing manager.
Actually, that's a really good point. It's half and half. It's half generic in that it would be corporate event manager, exhibit or trade show coordinator, exhibit or trade show manager, which makes a difference, marketing director. So we kept it to those basic categories because then it starts getting really chaotic. We found when you try to break it down even more than that. So we kept it kind of broad based, at this point, or rather I should say experience has taught us that it gets really, really chaotic and difficult to make any conclusions if you really get hyper specific with it. So it's more of a general map, if you will.
Thank you.
Of course.
And to piggyback on that, of the actual people that took the survey, are they typically people that work at the end user company, or is it any of them that are included for like display houses? Because I know a lot of those roles are included at display houses, or is it typically only if it's built in with a corporate company structure? Does that make sense?
There is a wide variety here. I was breaking it down and talking about, general categories, education, military, so on and such like. But we do break it down into a wide range of categories, which you can go through in the online version if you like. And that really gives you every little category. So here again, I took the overview because it would take the whole hour to go through every single category. But again here too, part of the problem is in getting data is who's responding. We get a pretty healthy response of about 600 or so people from different companies. So that ain't bad. But if I had my druthers, of course it'd be thousands getting out. So we really, really nail it even better. But it does go through the whole range of everyone from suppliers to someone in the military, which is kind of interesting. My best takeaway for the day, though, was I was so happy to see after 20 years in the industry, the way the gender disparity has started to completely reverse itself from just 10 years ago. That is hugely encouraging, meaning this is a really good industry for women to enter and to really, bloom in, if you will. It does get respect. It can provide a good living for you. It isn't a backwater. And for all those reasons alone, I like to think and hope to think that that disparity will continue to disappear and stay disappeared for the near future, at least.